My name is Erik Nordman. I'm a professor of natural resources management at Grand Valley State University.
Hi, I'm Denise Keel. I'm an associate professor jointly appointed in political science and the Institute of Environment Sustainability at Western Michigan University in Kalamazoo, Michigan. And I teach environmental policy and environmental law and focus on how interest groups and litigants use the court system to influence policy.
Hi, I'm Janet Vale. I'm a research scientist at Grand Valley State University and its Water Resources Institute. I coordinated the K-12 outreach program. I'm also involved in some curriculum development. I worked on the Michigan Environmental Education Curriculum Support Climate Change Unit for middle and high school students. And I'm involved with a project with Elena that is having a cohort of teachers kind of learn about climate change and develop lesson plans. I do teach sustainability as a lifestyle at GVSU, and I'm chair of the West Michigan Clean Air Coalition.
Thank you for having me. My name is Deirdre Courtney. I'm a PhD student at Western Michigan University, where my focus is on climate change displacement, refugees, and marginalized populations. I also founded a local hub of a national organization called Schools for Climate Action Michigan, where we empower the education sector and students to draft resolutions to sort of nudge education, climate change education. And I'm also involved with the Miracle program and various environmental projects.
I'm Marty Buehler. I've been a science educator. I just retired. I was an educator for 32 years, science Olympiad coach, and also the regional director at WMU. For probably 6 years. Recently, I attended a talk by Denise where we were inspired to take some action in our classrooms. And so my students and I put on a high school climate change symposium at Hastings High School. And we were able to draw students in from the area. And we pulled it off on March 11th, 2 days before we all got shut down, but we got it done. So wow. That was the venue. I've worked with climate change in the summers, doing research and RETs and so forth, and the tundra and at Tuluc and La Selva and Costa Rica and things like that. But this was a first big action point that I got to kind of take charge with my students. So it was a good day.
I'm Jess Thompson, a professor in the College of Business at Northern Michigan University in the UP. And I teach classes in sustainable business strategy, strategic communication, environmental campaign design. In March, right before the shutdown, I had taken a group of students on a study abroad to Cuba where we were looking at climate resiliency and community adaptation to changing ecosystems. But integrated into my day job, I serve on the Marquette County Climate Adaptation Task Force, where we're doing the same thing right here, whether it's in Cuba or the UP. There are lots of parallels.
Thank you very much for your introductions. Everybody has really interesting projects going on, and look forward to hearing more about them in the discussions. So I wanted to start our discussion off with this theme of climate change education and climate action, and whether you think there are boundaries between education and action. Can you go too far, or how comfortable are you pushing the boundaries, getting out of the classroom and into the community? And maybe we'll start, Deirdre, if you want to tackle that first. What is the connection or barrier or boundary between education and action?
Well, for me, I definitely think that I don't know that whether there's a boundary or not, but it definitely should not be. I really think that we need to find a way to educate students on issues that matter. These are things that they're concerned about, especially as it relates to climate change, and really just to go beyond the textbook and educate students and get them involved in social justice issues about race, for sure issues regarding climate change impacts, because these are things that are impacting our students. So.
Great. Denise, I see you nodding your head. Did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I didn't give all my fun titles in the intro. It gets too long. So since 2012, Western Michigan University has had a climate change working group, and I've chaired it since 2014. And we would absolutely say that it is our duty to serve as public intellectuals and to take all of the expertise that we have from our research and years of teaching and share that with our community. And that's probably going to be one of the only ways that we're able to address the climate crisis. So not only do we have a role, I think we absolutely lose credibility when we don't provide that sort of action. Of course, there are some guidelines. And so we also help run the Kalamazoo Climate Crisis Coalition, which involves community members and all sorts of other groups. And we've created some really nice guidelines about adhering to scientific integrity, about staying nonpartisan. So there are some maybe guideposts around that, but it's absolutely our role to provide the necessary expertise in the community action planning.
Great. Janet, did you have anything that you wanted to add from your perspective?
Yes, I do. I think it's important for each educator to find the balance that is best for them, and just kind of go with your intuition. The other thing, kind of a tenet of environmental education, is to teach students how to think, not what to think. So that's, again, a little bit of a delicate balance.
I would build on both of those points. When you're in a classroom with those students, there's been a big kind of a reflex against the old, I'll send you my thoughts and prayers thing I've noticed in the last couple of years. And people want to hear that you're taking action. And with students, especially younger students, K through 12 students especially, but my high school students is my experience. If you're out front leading and you put your skin in the game, so to speak, and you do that, that really is more than any of the words or the lessons you're going to do. It has weight with them. And you have to lead by example. So I agree also with Janet, you have to find your comfort point, because, taking on that kind of stress of doing something, really large scale might not be your style, but there's always some way to serve and let those kids see you do it.
Yeah, and it's definitely taking a risk, putting your neck out there in the community, which can lead to great rewards, but there can also be pushback from some people in the community as well. Jess, did you have anything that you wanted to add to that?
Well, yeah, this reminds me, for the past few years, I was organizing a climate march in Marquette, and a colleague would say, isn't that risky? Like, really, should you be doing that? Ugh. And I realized, maybe as a junior faculty member, I would have felt like I needed to divorce my weekend activism from my role as a public intellectual. But as the issue gained so much momentum, and my students were standing up and saying, why aren't grown-ups doing anything? Why aren't you taking action? Why aren't you standing up in the streets? And I realized it was a point of entry where I had resources, ability, freedom to organize. And I think we really do. We walk this delicate balance, and I'm not going to tell my students what to think, but I can show through example, through leadership. I can talk about the struggle, what it means to stand up in my community and take action and take that risk, and what some of the, as you mentioned, Erik, the costs and benefit of that are. And I think just telling that story, just like we do with researchers, we ask, what are the questions you're asking? What are the changes that you're seeing? The same goes for activism. Like, what is that process that you're going through, both personally and socially?
As scientists, we're observing these, and I was it Denise that said at some point you have an obligation to speak up on, and the community looks to us as educators to be informed on these issues like climate change. Janet, I wanted to go back to you for our next question about reimagining environmental education in the time of COVID. you talked during the break, you mentioned that you usually take out students on some of the research vessels that Grand Valley has, and you weren't able to do that. So how has the experience of reimagining education in the time of COVID affected you, and how does that translate into reimagining education, in the time of climate change?
I would say one really good thing from the COVID-19 is that students are getting outdoors a lot more. And for some schools, that's the venue that, that they're going to really hopefully experience nature to a fuller extent. As far as, how we are going to reimagine the system, I think we had some excellent talks this morning that really got to the heart of all of that. And I think we're all just kind of reimagining our lives right now. And I think we'll look at this as life before Zoom and life after Zoom. Mm-hmm. But we have a really good chance to kind of maybe reset some things and start over and see how well we can do.
Yeah. Does anyone else have any thoughts about how you're reimagining, does, life after Zoom constrain your activities, or does it open up new possibilities?
Okay, I would say for our organization, Schools for Climate Action Michigan, before the pandemic, right before the pandemic, we were actually working with students. We would go into the schools and host workshops, engaging with the students and helping them to adopt climate change resolutions for their schools, local legislators, and their school boards. And because, or due to the pandemic, we had to stop our grassroots activities as far as going into the schools. But since the summer and having to reimagine how we would continue working with the students, we actually have started working with students virtually. So in a way, it's sort of been a hindrance not being able to get into the schools and conduct the workshops, but we're able to work with a vast or more a variety of students due to this, the availability of Zoom. In fact, I've worked with a school in South Carolina to pass their very first school resolution, and we did that all virtually.
Wow, that is fantastic. So you're really reaching a much broader community in different parts of the country.
Just really quickly, when the pandemic first hit, we were still planning our original Earth Day. And our community came together and instead did an entire Earth Week of digital virtual-based events that more people attended than would have attended, based on Facebook hits and views and all these things that I still don't quite understand, but more people attended that, like 10,000 rather than maybe the 1,500 that we would have gotten at an in-person event. So it has expanded access, just like Deirdre said. We have a book club that meets monthly, and it's now international because we have people from France and Belgium that are able to join our book club. But the relationship to COVID, I'd like to go back to what Janet said, is really important in really normalizing all of these unfortunate inequalities and realizing that climate change is part of this interrelated crisis is one of the things that I talk about a lot, right? That it's not just climate change. This is about economics and justice and health, and that all those things go together. And I do see it as an opportunity to reimagine and to more holistically view how we approach these problems.
I'll probably talk to the Battle Creek and Math and Science Center people that are taking over our climate change symposium, but I would bring students to OPWAL, Operation Wallacea things, research in the summer, and we were always teamed up with either Finnish students or Portuguese students or some other country, and those teachers and the kids and my kids all have stayed in touch with each other, and we started using Zoom, and we talked about including some kind of international effort with our current students to do a little climate change session. Time zones are a problem and there's things to work out, but Zoom really opens up some opportunities around here, but also internationally. And my exchange students, when they go home, they still want to keep working on that. And so we Zoom meet with that. So I think there's a real potential to broaden out across the whole world for some of the actions and activities that we might come up with.
And Jessica, yeah, how is this affecting how you deliver climate education and action?
Well, I think it's this beautiful metaphor for what we can do with climate action, because Zoom existed well before the pandemic hit. It was a tool that different people were using at a much lower rate. And then we had this quick pivot. We utilized the technology that had been there. And I feel like the same story is there for climate change. The technology is here. We have solutions that we don't need big, expensive, out there investments to get to a cleaner, lower carbon lifestyle. We already have the tools. It was just about being forced to use them. And what has been beautiful is my carbon footprint has gone down. I'm not flying to conferences. I'm not driving the 400 miles to Grand Rapids for this conference. It really has allowed me as an individual to participate more. And just to echo everyone else's sentiment, it's allowed us to bring speakers from much farther away, to network our students with international partners and examples. So I think we could just use it as a moment to think about what technologies are already here to help us address climate change and start harnessing them in a way that has broader acceptability, like we've done with Zoom.
I just wanted to add one last point. I really do miss a lot of the students that we meet in person. And I know that they miss each other, but one thing I have noticed with the Zoom access, they're able to connect with others and meet new people, like everyone has said, internationally, people who they probably would never in a lifetime, or at least during their primary school years, be able to connect with someone abroad. So
it really expands the range of people that you might encounter. If we're, in physical space, we might just be limited to this little bubble in our neighborhoods, but now we can reach a much broader community all over. So we have a broad range of perspectives here. We've got a PhD student. Denise and I actually went to graduate school together almost 20 years ago, believe it or not. So we have some veterans here, and we've got some younger people. And I was wondering, how has climate education changed over the years? Have you experienced, more interest? I think we all feel that this is a crisis now, and this is reaching the highest levels. But, George H.W. Bush, signed the UN Framework Convention in 1990. So, it's been a high level issue for 30 years or longer. How has that affected how you deliver education in this sector?
In the late 90s, early 2000s, when I was in graduate school, I was working with a research team that was funded by the National Science Foundation it was one of these biocomplexity projects. And half of the research team didn't want to use the phrase climate change. Here they were, PhDs, experts in their fields. And they were like, well, we can't say that. Let's call it urban air quality. And that actually that was the topic of my dissertation in the early 2000s, was just the language that we negotiate to talk about science, in this particular case, climate change. So today, and again, it's sort of like these other experiences, it's just not controversial. There's plenty of evidence and science. No longer do I fret that I'm going to alienate these students. And inevitably, the student political spectrum has gotten wider. You can sense, it's palpable what university students bring into the classroom in terms of their political views and positions. But now I feel like I don't fear bringing it up in the way that I did 20 some years ago. And that might just be doing it for a while. It might be that the social awareness has caught up, and the fact that these great K-12 students are arriving at college already knowing what climate change is. I didn't. I didn't show up at college with a good understanding of it. It wasn't part of my K-12 education. So big kudos to all the K-12 educators who have made this part of the curriculum and have taken students out to see and talk about places and their importance.
Erik, you might be surprised to know that Dr. Keele and I also shared a classroom, but that was because she was my instructor. And I really wanted to add to this question because it was an honor for me as an only African-American female in her classes, and the ongoing projects that Western Michigan has put on for as relates to climate change. And as a result of the things that I learned, also as Jessica mentioned, being the only student of color learning these new topics and trying to integrate it, not in just in my education, but also in real life. As a result, I designed a course with the topic with the topic on African Americans and climate change, And, to bring in other diverse students, other students of color, to learn the very things that my instructors like Dr. Keele taught me and the importance of climate change education.
Yeah, and I think that's probably something that wasn't emphasized, back in, the 1990s and early 2000s. It was, at least for me, I remember hearing about, endangered species and things like that. It was much more focused on the environment. We weren't really talking about the human impact to a large degree. I think that's definitely something that's changed. Yeah, Marty, go ahead.
I have been really my eyes opened a little bit about an educator's impact as my students who are, all part of that effort last year. They text me all the time. Dane Barnes is texting me right now, and his friends from Grand Valley's over there saying, "Oh, I see your teacher on there." And they're at U of M and at Chicago. They're all over the place, and they're getting involved on their own. They're like Deirdre. They're taking up the cause and they're doing their parts, and it's at different levels of comfort, like Janet said, but they're doing it. They're going to take this on, and we do have an impact that way. And then it's like that pond, a little pebble hits the water and it ripples out,
Mm-hmm.
So, I've really been encouraged by that lately.
I really kind of dug into the science part in the mid-90s, and just, pretty amazing things that were predicted then, are certainly happening at this point. But when I was developing the climate change curriculum, that was starting, I think, in about, I want to say 2013-14, somewhere in that realm. And at that point, the state of Michigan actually was supportive of doing that. And I did see a lot of teachers, hoping that something would be coming out. So that was certainly a change. There's a Yale climate change communication project. It's very, very interesting to look at. And I see somebody going, yeah, we know that one. But if you look at some of the graphs over time in there, you can see how people's feelings about climate change have changed, throughout the decade or so. But I did pull up something today, and it was 78% of the folks in the 2020 version of the survey believe that schools should teach about, they're calling it global warming. So that's a pretty good chunk of folks that definitely believe in that. Mm-hmm. And some other things that kind of I noticed too is that only a few folks, like 35% of the respondents, were actually discussing climate change or global warming. And only 25% felt that the media was, giving climate change its due. So mm-hmm. Interesting changes. So if you get a chance to look at that Yale website, it's got some very interesting types of things.
I just wanted to chime in on this question because it's at the same time how much has changed. It's also, very maybe depressing, right? To get over the despair that this has been an issue for 40 years. And, you know, there's also recent data telling us that the amount of emissions that we've put out in my lifetime is equal to the historic emissions of the entire past. And so I think it really has to bear on us this question of now urgency. And that's what I see has most changed, right, in our adaptation here. And I would agree with Jess. I used to teach, oh, there's a scientific consensus. And then I used to teach, oh, there's now an economics consensus. And now I teach, this is a moral justice equity issue, like what Deirdre is talking about. And there really isn't any time left. And our youth know that. And they know that it's their future that's being stolen, and they are coming and asking, you know, what are we going to do? So it's so related to that first question about action for me as well.
Great, thank you. So you all teach a range of students. Janet engages with a lot of middle school students. Denise, you're teaching, and Jess too, you're teaching college students, and Marty, you've got high school students. So how do you tailor your messages to these particular groups of students? And Jess teaches in the business school versus, you know, Janet's over at AWRI. You've got the environmental institutes at Western Michigan represented here. So how do you tailor your messages to different students?
You noted the big elephant in the room, the business school. And this has been, I will say this is going to be my career highlight. I wasn't always in a College of Business. I started in a College of Humanities. I went to a College of Natural Resources. And then the College of Business said, whoa, we need sustainability to be part of our core. And so I got airlifted into a whole new culture. And it's been amazing, because it's one thing to teach to the choir. It was amazing. It was great being in a College of Natural Resources with students who we were already aligned. We could jump straight to action. And what I found to be really powerful with especially my MBA students is case studies. And I just bring a case study. Last week we were talking about DAPL, the Dakota Access Pipeline, and the case study is written from the development perspective. And then it was like Indigenous Peoples Day, and we started to unpack it. And that has been, I've gotten more emails in the past week from those students saying, I can't believe I hadn't thought about these issues. I can't believe I didn't put it in that perspective. And so using case studies as a way for them to try on different perspectives in kind of a safe space has it's worked for me. So that's probably a strategy. And also I just love the challenge of taking their little capitalist minds and not to condescend them at all, but I love to like, okay, let me tell you about Cuba. And they're like, whoa, I'm like, we're more alike than we are different. And I think it is a challenge, but I will say is going to be the most rewarding thing I do in my career.
Thanks. Marty, how do you connect with your students and, you know, make that shift from just education to action at the high school level?
Well, it starts with the relationships. And so, you know, it would be really easy just to say, oh, it's common sense. You have to look at where they're at and figure it out, which is all part of that. But you really have to develop relationships. And then as a part of that, you listen. And so when you listen to what the students think and how they, you know, they're motivated and what their fears are and what they want to do, and then you challenge them to go beyond a little bit. It's all, you know, a give and take, and that's relationships. So if you do that, develop those relationships and are successful with that, then you can just turn those kids loose, and they'll tell you what they can do, what are our areas that we're able to have action in, and they'll just start spitting out ideas. Some of them are feasible and some are not, but you know, then you can just tap into that, and they need that experience that we have. And so you can team up with them, and through that relationship and teamwork you can really go far, and whatever that level is, whether it be like Janet's with middle school kids, here's where you can go, here's what you personally can do, but high school kids, et cetera, there's always an area that you can narrow it down and figure out where their action point is and what they can do and how they can have an impact.
Thanks, Marty. And let's bring that to Janet with the middle school students.
Most of what we're doing in my outreach education program is water related. We might touch a little bit on what's going on with climate change, but I certainly am able to see what's in the minds of middle school students. But just a couple of things that we've found to be relevant is to make it personal to them, make it local, and try to get them to have a personal connection with their community. And so this meaningful, locally relevant experience can go much farther than, for instance, if you're talking about climate change, you're talking about polar bears. Okay, so what's actually happening in your community? And there's a wonderful program called Global Learning and Observations to Benefit the Environment. It's a NASA supportive program where students can actually take information from their environment. They can study trees and clouds and water quality parameters. And they can also share their data with others throughout the world, and they have student research projects as well. So kind of putting it under a banner of doing something and just digging into a little bit more about what's going on with your local environment, and then comparing it with what's happening elsewhere.
Right, keeping it local and making it relevant. So this is going to be the last round of questions here, and then I'm going to open up for the chat. So if you in the audience have questions, you can put them in the Q&A section there, and I will be sure to ask the questions to the panel. But Deirdre, how do you make that connection with the students that you work with?
I think I would just piggyback on what everyone has said so far, and exactly what Janet has said, especially for students that are part of marginalized populations. You really have to make the education relatable, something that they can relate to, and then expand from a local perspective to a global perspective. I think that students tend to learn better that way. They see something in a way that they can understand it, and then they, go from there. So I think it definitely has to be something that they can relate to, or that's at least been the approach that I use with my students and the organizations that I engage with.
I definitely would echo, I think you guys, this is why you're amazing educators. You first start with listening, even at the college level, right? Like, where are you? Who is my audience? Rule number one to any effective communication. And then I totally would second the place-based and the use of case studies. And the more local that I can make them, here in Kalamazoo, with the Kalamazoo oil spill, we are the site of the largest inland oil spill. And so, utilizing that kind of local knowledge and thinking about why we still pump oil around and underneath us if we're going to try to solve a climate crisis, and keeping that local, but also involving that experiential component for our college students, right, and getting them out in the community and doing then what's the next action step. My only other thing to add would be to keep it interdisciplinary. We've really been intentional about that, and that word has been thrown around probably as long as climate change, and I still don't know that we know how to do it or what we're doing, but we are getting, I think, better at making the connections between the sciences and the social sciences and the humanities, and giving folks a real holistic picture and set of tools that these are folks who are going to become the environmental professionals, right? And so that's really, they need to know a little bit of all of those things along with that disciplinary knowledge. And so that's our biggest challenge, I think, in higher ed.
Thanks, Denise. So we've got a question from the audience. It's from Tim, and I'm going to direct this to Jess, who's in the business school. Tim says, I teach mostly rural high school students, and I'm having a hard time helping them see that addressing climate change will not necessarily tank the economy.
Yeah, that is a classic, right? People often see it as an either or, that they're mutually exclusive. You pick the environment or you pick economics. And we're seeing there's more and more data to show the top performing businesses are making sustainable decisions and choices. We're moving, so two big things, energy and then life cycle analysis. So we're seeing companies that are being that are really successful and high rated in their stocks are companies that are investing in renewable energy. There's less conflict, like the DAPL case. There's less law litigation, and there's greater equity and access to renewables. Especially since the prices have come down in the past 10, 15 years, we've seen that become more cost efficient than coal. In my community, 2 power plants, coal-fired power plants, have closed in the past year. So we're sitting on the front wave of that transition. That works. I'm also in a rural community where a lot of people make a living working for a mine, which is owned by either a Canadian or a European home parent company. And so the conversation about resource extraction is very palpable. And we talk about how those resources deplete, whereas renewable resources will continue to add to the economic base. And then the second thing that I mentioned is life cycle products, and looking big companies, like Pepsi and Coke, who are putting a lot of investment into reclaiming their bottles so they can use them to make new bottles. Instead of using oil-based products to make plastic, they are trying to move to a 100% life cycle closed loop product. And so those are 2 of the biggest economic things that at least make my rural students' eyes pop. A great book, Reimagining Capitalism, by Rebecca Henderson. She's a professor at Harvard, and it is easy to read. It's quite enjoyable, and there are dozens and dozens and dozens of examples of the economic argument winning in the case of climate change.
Fantastic. Those are great resources. So we'll make those available to everyone in the chat box too. And if anybody has questions, you can put them in the Q&A session down at the bottom, or you can use the raise your hand function and unmute yourself, or you can put them in the chat box as well. So we have a few minutes left. We can hear audience questions. I think in one of the meetings that we had prior to this, one of you guys said that this is a movement, not a moment. And maybe Deirdre, did you want to, I don't know if that was you that said that, but how do you see this process continuing, after, you're a PhD student, after you leave, how are these projects going to continue in the long run?
Actually, I think that was Dr. Keele that made that statement, but she's absolutely right. One of the things that I can say from personal experience is the way that I've sustained the work that I do is it just naturally is a connection. Climate change is connected to action. I started learning about these things, how the climate is impacting our society, how it's impacting the globe in terms of global warming and the natural disasters. And as a result of that, I couldn't help but to get involved and just start to act and advocate. So that has inspired a lot of my projects and work that I'm doing today. And I think it's pretty much the same for most people.
Excellent, thanks. Oh, Denise, maybe I'm gonna give you the question from the audience. Can you discuss ways to engage different disciplines in the movement? Climate change is not an issue just for science students.
That's excellent. Absolutely. This interdisciplinary idea has been around for a long time. And, we still are out there teaching a lot of science students and teaching the basic science. And don't get me wrong, you have to know some of that. You have to understand physically what is actually happening. But some of the best examples that we have are humanists from the English department, for example. There was a whole genre of what's called cli-fi, right? And it shouldn't even be science fiction. Most of these are actually, dystopian novels that are describing probably what's actually going to happen. And I've really found that as a great way through our book club and in classes to engage folks who might not otherwise be thinking about climate change. And you learn a little bit of the science, or you start to wonder, boy, is that really something that could happen? Is that what the future could look like? But you do so through literature, which is meant to help us imagine our lives as humans and and who we are, right? And so bringing in, a short story into our my political science class, right, as well with the resources Janet talked about the Yale and all the polls, all those things can actually work together and strengthen our overall understanding. So that'd be my one thing, is go read some climate change novels. You'll be really amazed at what's out there, I think.
Great. Thank you, Denise. Does anyone, Marty or Janet, do you have any concluding thoughts that you wanted to share? Maybe something that surprised you?
Yeah, a couple of concluding thoughts. I recently saw a webinar that really kind of changed how I was approaching the teaching of climate change. And I had been showing, the usual charts and graphs and all of that, and recognizing that my students' eyes were glazing over. And the person who delivered the webinar said, the real solution to reaching people through the education realm is to just talk about it. Talk with them, why and how it matters, how is it, affecting their community, but then talk about positive things we can do. And the person said, it's as simple as that. Just get out there and talk about it. And even if you encounter a climate skeptic, just try to find out where they're getting stuck and just talk.
Absolutely. And Marty, did you have any powerful lessons, anything you wanted to share, last thoughts with the audience?
Well, I'll share this. The kids honored me with letting me be the graduation speaker this summer. And, it was a real unique experience with everyone in cars and things like that. But as I thought about what I was going to say to those graduating seniors, I thought about them personally. And I had a lot of confidence from watching them over the last 4 years and, watching them engage with all these different activities and listening to them and what they're going to do. And so many of them are in environmental sciences and things like that now. I just really have a lot of confidence that they're going to be successful. They're going to go after this, and our future is in good hands with them. And, so many people gripe about, kids nowadays. You're not going to hear from me. These guys got it. And, we just need to light the fuse and they're going to go. So start your matches, light some fuses.
Excellent. Thank you, Marty. There is one more question that came in from the audience, and I'm going to give this to Jess. I had a friend once ask a teacher how we can support renewables when they are made up of non-renewable minerals like lithium. Doesn't this defeat the purpose? Wanted to know how you educators would respond to this question.
That is such a great question. And I have encountered it in other conversations. And I think just like everything, growing pains, intellectual growing pains, the renewable energy industry is going through its own kind of growing pains. How does it find a way to be self-sustaining and renewable in and of itself, of gaining renewable energy? And I think there's some neat research. I've got friends up at Michigan Tech who are looking at salt as a replacement for lithium. If we shut down that industry, if we stop making a demand for it, we'll stop the innovation and the research that is needed to propel it to the next generation. And so while your friend is right, these are minerals that are extracted, that are not renewable. We're in the middle stages of growth. And I have faith. I have been accused of being an optimist, but I believe that we continue along this path and support the industry for renewables, we will find much more sustainable solutions. And, wind is pretty lovely with less extracted resources required to build a turbine, and we'll continue to find. It's not just one. And I think, Erik, this would be my closing comment. It's not just solar. It's not just one solution. 1,000 decisions got us into this mess. It's going to take hundreds of thousands of individual actions along all different lines to get us out of it.
Thanks. And I like the way you brought it back to action. And that's what this is all about, climate education for climate action. So I want to give a round of applause to our panelists, Denise Keel, Jessica Thompson, Marty Buehler, Deirdre Courtney, and Janet Vail. Thank you very much for participating and sharing your experience with the group.